let's start by, I'm going to pick on our middle player first here. Name the industry you think has the most opportunity when it comes to visual tech right now, and give me an example of a company you're excited about in it.
Am I the middle player? Oh.
I'm starting with you, Sarah. But
okay. So, well, it is hard to pick because, as you say, it's being applied to a lot of different industries. One of our areas that we focus a lot on is cybersecurity, and so understanding what's happening around physical locations is one area that's really important. Evan, I know, has written about the Internet of Eyes and the fact that cameras are starting to be placed everywhere. One of the applications of that will be to make physical locations safe. And if you think, in particular, some of the things we're experiencing today, that seems to be a big need and timely. That said, it's, we're seeing visual technology applied to media and marketing. That happens to be my category, so I tend to see some things. I was an angel investor in T-Vision Insights. Affectiva, as you mentioned before, is a really interesting company.
Let's stay on that security piece for a minute. So what kinds of companies might we expect to see? And you guys feel free to jump in on this security question as well.
So I think that we can expect to see companies that, if you think about it today, whenever there's been some kind of crime committed, companies are going back to wherever the cameras were in that area to reconfigure what happened after the fact. I think that with AI applied, people will be able to figure out what is happening by being able to determine, by certain activities or actions, the things to watch out for and to alert people about. So it's just like in the cybersecurity world, where hackers are getting after a network, and we're focused on that too. But to just help people understand where to pay attention, and that's the case with all of the AI-related technologies, I think, in security.
Fair enough. Okay, so Nihal, industry and company.
Yeah, I think in security, actually, we're seeing a lot of interesting companies in the drone space that are using computer vision to do a variety of things. Actually, yesterday we were at Carnegie Mellon for an AI robotics fair, and incredible kind of computer vision innovations coming out of that ecosystem. And a bunch of drone companies. There's one in particular that was doing infrastructure inspection. So actually, Amazon is kind of leading the charge in a lot of respects, but their new factories are actually dome-shaped, or their new warehouses are dome-shaped. So they actually have they allow for drones to fly at the top of the dome to basically use computer vision for asset tracking, and they can scan the barcodes at a very high altitude, so they can actually take in real time look at all their inventory as it's being processed in and out at rapid speeds. And so this company is essentially doing that for other warehouses and infrastructure, but it's using computer vision at the drone layer. Another really cool company we saw last month is balloon tech. So literally a telescope. Balloon tech to hold. Maybe Evan, we start a balloon tech conference at some point in the future. Spin off of
so it's like
LDV.
Helium, Mickey Mouse balloon.
Yeah, basically a Mickey Mouse balloon with a telescope, at the bottom, and this company is doing basically, high resolution, high frequency imaging. So whether you're an ecologist or a police department, you can actually surveil an area like a real-time Google Earth type of feature, right? Using computer vision.
So that's a great example. How about you, Michael? An industry and a company.
3 industries. So I concur on drones, autonomous vehicles for sure, and then I would also say the kind of smart home space. So think of each of those use cases drones, in addition to those use cases, are there's a whole anti-drone drone defense segment that's coming up, which is to detect and thwart drones that are invading airspace around prisons, around stadiums, around data centers, around corporate HQ for espionage and the whole 9 yards. So imagine what you have to see, kind of analyze, process, and kind of quickly get to kind of humans to kind of determine what the right call of action is.
So that's drone defense.
Drone
that's
defense.
Security product
Yes.
to secure against the drones that may be trying to secure
Absolutely.
from you.
Yes, and there's plenty of revenue already in the market today being spent on this, where even 12, 18 months ago, there wouldn't have been.
Do you have an investment in a company that does this?
We don't, but this is
Yeah.
the next sector that we're kind of currently spending time on.
Yeah.
I'd say, obviously, autonomous vehicles are stress testing the capabilities of all sensors, LiDAR, camera, radar, everything else to kind of get to the right form factors, to get to the right real-time processing, to get to the right analytics, the whole 9 yards. And I think that's just going to continue to evolve. And then smart home and that whole adjunct, which is, either this is what you see Amazon and other commerce players pushing, which is delivering of goods inside your home, delivering of goods inside your fridge, delivering of goods inside your trunk, because not everybody has a home, an apartment that's tended to, and you can kind of store packages. So think about the fidelity of the image processing and the smarts that need to kind of support that kind of convenience and utility that those guys are going to engender. So we're very interested in that too.
Thank you. Let's stay on transportation a second. How have the opportunities for investing in transportation-related companies changed in the last year? And if you're not investing closely enough to know, that's okay too.
Yeah, I think very, very dramatically, the autonomous vehicle ecosystem is massive for sure. I think one of the largest exits that maybe tipped off M&A and liquidity in the space was Cruise. That was acquired by General Motors. We have a company in Boston that's doing predictive computer vision, so it actually can predict the path of any object that's in and around the vehicle's path. And I think the picks and shovels of autonomous vehicles is super interesting. So,
picks and shovels?
Yeah, basically the tools that enable the AV developer to be more efficient. So, for example, actually another company we saw yesterday uses just cell phones to capture road data. So they drive around with cell phones, and they're using just standard 1080p video capture from an iPhone, and they're using computer vision to detect potholes and cracks in the roads, and they're actually selling that data to municipalities and to autonomous vehicle companies. So if you're in a self-driving car, it'd be cool for the car to already know that there's a massive pothole, coming up after the intersection, and to avoid that.
Right. Anything on transportation?
I'll chime in. Obviously, on the sensor side, everyone wants a cheaper LiDAR, right? Or other variations of camera and radar technology. So, I'm sure we're all getting pitched left and right on companies kind of pursuing that. I think the other thing to piggyback off of your comment is, how do you map the world, right? That's why Waymo's constantly commenting about how many miles they've driven, and therefore, how much has been captured in their database, so that when they do drive, they know what they're going to see. And I think there's interesting companies that can be created there to solve that problem and potentially then harvest and harness that data. So in China, there's a company called Momenta.ai. Some of you may know it, but they're going to get to full autonomy, but their first sets of products are literally dash cams that are two-way or two different units. One focused on the driver of trucks and stuff like that to make sure they're awake, they're healthy, they're paying attention, and one just out on the road. They actually give the camera away for free to the fleet in order to have the camera externally focused, because they want to capture that data. And think about the amount of truckers driving around. They are amassing one of the largest data sets on roads driven in China right now that they can then in turn use to sell to every other AV company that wants to operate over there. So where's the equivalent of that in the US or any other kind of market around the world? I think it's a really interesting, seed the market with X in order to really harvest the value down the road with a different business model.
The question of how you build those maps and who builds those maps is divinely interesting, both for this moment right now and the logistics ride-sharing services you're seeing, but also for the coming moment of autonomy. Are you guys seeing any interesting startups? You mentioned one that you saw yesterday who are tackling pieces of that.
We just saw an interesting startup in the category, and I think that a lot of these companies are after, the safety bit, the surety of of routes, and so a lot of that is going to be about data capture, and actually, before there is a true self-driving car, there's going to be the steps that are taken of, just driving cars where they need to go and learning the routes and memorizing the routes. So we recently saw an interesting company. I thought instead of looking out with LiDAR, it's looking down with radar and memorizing where, how the car gets from one place to another. So it's a safer method of driving, but
it's really interesting. Yeah, Nihal?
I don't know if this is the same company, but it probably is. But the thing that's super interesting is they're mapping what the under the road, what the surface looks like with radar, so that on a cloudy day, if you notice, like even now with self-driving cars, like in Tesla, the auto drive will go off because it can't actually see the road ahead of it. But using this type of technology, when you're looking down underneath the surface of the road, you can actually follow a road regardless of the weather conditions.
Right.
Interesting.
Another one was, I think Affectiva is doing this, but using emotional recognition within the car to make sure that the driver isn't falling asleep. So that was, I thought, a really good example of cameras going everywhere.
And for anyone in the audience who doesn't know, can you describe Affectiva in a sense?
Affectiva is their category is facial recognition. So and really it's about mapping the expression so that you can understand what somebody's feeling, whether they're happy or sad or going to sleep, and doing with that what you will.
And most importantly, paying attention when they're behind a self-driving wheel, which we have had reason to pay a lot of attention to this spring with the Arizona accident, Uber's Arizona accident. So let's move on to another category, media and advertising, since this is really your category, but also Comcast with the business that you're in, you pay a little bit of attention to it. What's exciting there right now, and what's overblown there right now?
Well, I mean, AI appears to be in everything in advertising, and I think that if it didn't have it before, they're sprinkling some on top. So there's a little AI. Usually that means machine learning. In the visual space,
I was going to say, I mean, on the press releases I get, people slap the word AI on everything.
Yeah.
But a lot of what we're talking about isn't quite that yet, right?
No, I mean, to me, AI is something that learns. So it gets better over time, and not just with the data set it's given, but it's synthesizing lots of different types of data. So it's getting to, more creative types of solutions, or more complex. It's delivering more complex solutions by synthesizing data. In the visual space, there seems to be a lot of focus on emotion and attention. T-Vision Insights is one. It's like a Nielsen panel that can tell who is watching TV in the room, whether there are multiple people in the room, whether they're actually watching commercials while they run, whether they're actually watching content while it runs. And that's valuable data for advertisers, because we all know, a lot of people don't pay attention when the TV's on in the room, even though the ratings are there. So they actually have attention ratings. Affectiva is another one. I think it's used in a different way. It's to make sure that your creative is getting the reaction that you're looking for it to have. And I think lots of times Affectiva is used in the development phase. If you're creating a commercial that you mean for people to laugh when they see it, this kind of gives you a sense of how many people are actually laughing when they watch it. There's Gum Gum. I know Ophir was on an earlier panel. That's using visual as a method of targeting. So if I have a brand that the advertising just works better when it's adjacent to a certain type of visual. That allows you to target in that specific way. It's kind of it's a method. And I think it's important too because, the web is becoming more visual, digital, in all of its devices. People are absorbing information that way. So we have to find ways to use visuals in the way.
Well put. That's an extension of our earlier panel in some ways.
Yeah.
Michael.
I would say maybe offering a different perspective, which would be the perspective of the content owner or the IP owner. When they look at AI, when they look at visual tech, how are they thinking about it? I think on the AI front, you're somewhat anxious because it usually is in reference to your distribution platform or somebody downstream who's going to be dictating who sees your content, right? So, whether it be the algorithms that Facebook and Google and YouTube kind of control, or, in China, there's a company called Total, which is really the news feed of all of China, and that's all completely algorithmic. This is all AI powered and not really kind of by any other editorial kind of curation. So content owners are really anxious about that kind of relationship because it obviously impacts downstream monetization. I think on the visual side, obviously for the last few years, it's been about VR and AR, right? If you have big Hollywood branded IP, you want to think about how can I tell the story of that IP in a new format like VR, or how could I bring it into AR? So, that is still a hot topic, 3-4 years into kind of the most recent cycle of VR and AR. Maybe it's more on AR than on VR, but you can't shake a stick at that in LA.
Are you still bullish on VR? Because you might be in a category of one in my Rolodex right now.
I am bullish on my companies in VR, but I have been...
Good answer.
Yes. But no, I've been on record since the end of 2016 saying that we're in for a shakeout on VR. So I think we were talking down here, that was an example of a category where if you could see the hype cycle evolving a certain way, if you had a smart management team that would work with its board of directors, you could go out and overcapitalize your company early, get the money while the money is there to be had, but doesn't mean you go out and spend the money, right? Dial it back and just kind of preserve it and try to time the market from when it actually will show up, because it's still the market that needs to show up.
And we'll get to you, Nihal, on this question. I'm not skipping you, but I want to stay on AR and VR for just a second. It's an interesting moment from my perspective for AR because we're, 6 to 8 months after a lot of the phones came out with their dev kits for AR. And so we're starting to see some interesting things. Is there anything that what do you think the next 6 to 9 months of AR are going to look like?
AR needs more and better developers, right? So I think for those of us who focus a lot, so again, sorry, I'm going to focus this comment on consumer-centric apps in AR for a second. We can talk about enterprise separately, but I think the depth and the quality of the devs and the ideas is not quite there yet. And I'm looking at my friend Tipita Chenivasan, who does this even more than any of us. VR
what is his company? You're gonna give him a nod. Hey,
yes.
Nice to see you.
VR Fund.
VR Fund.
Venture Reality Fund. Yeah. If everything is just a knockoff of a scavenger hunt, Pokemon Go kind of thing, that is not the only game mechanic or user kind of experience that one should be pursuing in AR. If everything is just about taking a character, putting it on the stage and having it jump up and down next to the four of us, that's what does that lead to, right? So I think we just need to have more fully flushed ideas on the apps, on the experiences, what we're really going for, and challenge ourselves to kind of think about what AR truly enables. I think for better or for worse, people have different views on Magic Leap. They are being more thoughtful about engendering a full ecosystem if you can pierce through kind of the NDAs and kind of really see what they're up to. But they've gone out and handpicked specific developers in gaming, in film, and other creative arts to go and help push the envelope on consumer-centric stuff, even though the hardware may still be a generation 2 away.
Are you long on Magic Leap?
I am not an investor in Magic Leap. I am long on the developers that would consider building on it, but not necessarily the platform itself.
Good answer. Nihal, Media and advertising. Are you making any investments in that space?
No.
Yeah. Well, great. Then we'll move on.
We invested actually very early in a company called Immersive Labs in New York that actually had cameras in billboards, and they were able to basically tell who was looking at them, right? And so charging advertisers based on a CPM, based on direct eyesight. That company is now part of another company called Kairos that's also leveraging computer vision for brands and advertising, mostly for out of home.
Right.
But yeah, we haven't done much in ad tech recently.
So, one question, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, one question that I wonder about is how, when you're investing in startups right now, do you know what's a good investment and what is something that one of the big platforms is likely to build?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we're more bullish on enterprise in the past kind of 12 months. I think the big tech companies are executing extraordinarily well right now on consumer. So Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, and they're actually recruiting the best talent, and they actually have a lot of the best AI talent as well. Very few companies can afford to pay an AI developer $2 million a year, right? It's really those 4 companies that are able to do that.
That's a lot of venture capital.
Yeah, it's a lot of venture capital. So actually, we're seeing fund sizes actually scale down, venture fund sizes that are focused on consumer, because the theory is that gone are the days of kind of the WhatsApp and even like YouTube or Twitch-like acquisitions, billion plus. And so venture funds won't necessarily have those returns. Maybe you can sell a company for less than that, but your fund sizes have to come down to accommodate for just their incredible execution.
Right.
That's on the consumer side. Now on the enterprise side, I think there's so many lanes that are wide open. Of course, there's a lot of acquirers like Salesforce and Oracle and SAP, et cetera. That creates a lot of leverage for M&A, but there's huge lanes that are wide open, especially with AI in the enterprise. And so we're doing a lot more investing, I think, on the enterprise side than consumer because of those reasons.
Either of you guys want to jump in on that one?
We tend to lean more B2B too, but I'll just to your question of how do you know whether the platforms are going to develop it. I mean, I've seen some really good ideas where it is sort of like a next thing or a next form of communication. And when the founders present it to you, it's like it's going to be across all these platforms, but it's really just Facebook, or it's really just YouTube that it's focused on. And if 90% of the business is coming from one platform, then why on earth would that platform not see the opportunity and develop that? So we worry a lot about that stuff, and particularly if it's something that appears to be a really great opportunity and good revenue. So, but I agree. I mean, we think there are a lot of B2B categories, more narrowly focused AI opportunities that the opportunity is here right now. The data is there to go get and use, and it shouldn't be a long period of time to wait.
Fair enough. I want to bring our audience in. Does anyone want to jump in with a question? Right here. We're going to bring a microphone to you.
Hi, I'm going to reiterate that I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to try to talk loud. I just have a question. So I'm reading both Ad Age and Forbes, and they have a list on African American content creators. And they say that Black millennials spend $162 billion a year, which is like $14 billion a month. So why is there not a lot of marketing to them or ad buying on their blogs or whatever their content is? Can you guys kind of talk a little bit about that?
I don't know. I mean, I think most of the agencies have divisions that are dedicated towards specific demographics and verticals of audiences, Hispanic advertising as well, and targeting very specific ethnicities too. It tends to be a more expensive strategy. So you have to really decide for your brand that this audience is more predisposed to buy my product than a more homogenous, everybody mixed together type of audience. So I think that there are strategies that go specifically after those segments. But I don't think I have an AI answer for that, though.
I would jump in and offer something from my perspective as a journalist. We talk a lot about filling the pipeline and needing to see a more diverse set of faces creating services, and that will lead to a more diverse set of services that meet the needs of a more diverse group of people, which, by the way, will lead to a heck of a lot more profit. And I'm really interested in a group called AI for All, which if you don't know, you should learn about. That Fei Li out of Stanford started, I believe, with a woman named Olga out of Princeton. That is essentially going into high schools and creating summer programs in high schools in urban areas to bring young women into AI. So I would love to see more investment in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Another question? Way back in the back of the room, give us your name and your affiliation.
Hey, I'm Michael with Practical. And I was curious, how do you evaluate infrastructure and platform plays? It seems that often things are split into two different silos, consumer or enterprise, but typically your infrastructure or platform plays can work with both and will facilitate a development community that eventually builds for both consumer and enterprise. So I was curious, how do you evaluate companies like mine that are taking the more infrastructure and platform approach? Do you believe that there is room for infrastructure and platform plays?
Yes. So
I know we're keeping it short, but
infrastructure, actually, we're just starting to do more infrastructure investments because, especially for machine learning, the requirements are much greater on computing that we've ever seen. Down the road, a decade from now, maybe quantum becomes a reality, but in the meantime, we have to leverage kind of the existing GPUs and the infrastructure around the GPUs. And so the investment we recently made enables the scaling of infrastructure, kind of like Amazon Lambda, if you're familiar with that, in a stateful manner. So when machine learning apps are heavily utilized with demand, it can scale up and down in a serverless fashion. So I think they go hand in hand with consumer and enterprise applications. And I think this is probably the tip of the iceberg for a whole new breed of infrastructure that's going to be required for these applications.
Thank you for that. Okay, we're going to move to a speed round to finish this up. And the question on the table is this. Thinking broadly about visual technology and companies that you have seen, I would like you each to give me one company you really wish you had gotten in on. Michael, I'll start with you.
For me, it's a Beijing-based company called SenseTime, which kind of powers facial rec and all that in China. So probably is processing just as many images and all that kind of stuff as Google is everywhere else in the world. Yeah.
Facial recognition in China, no opportunity there or anything. Okay.
Well, I guess I'll pay homage to Evan on this one and say Clarify, because there's such a leader in developing a lot of the techniques, and it's obviously a company that will foster a lot of development.
And give us a quick line for anyone in the audience who may not know what Clarify is.
Well, Clarify has developed methods for imaging technology, and developers can tap into it and apply it in all of their unique custom ways to their own companies.
Thank you. Nihal.
A small company called Mobileye. That was a very small acquisition by Intel a couple of years ago, I think $15 billion. Mobileye powers most of the computer vision in cars.
Right. Big time. Okay, we still have 2 minutes left, which never happens. So is there anybody out there who has a final question for our audience? We have back here. We're going to bring you a microphone. Awesome.
Hi, so my name's Susan, and my company is LumenDX, and I'm curious, you guys invest in AI, but how do you make sure that you're staying up to date? Because AI is all about feedback loops and speeding up, but these investments can take years to figure out how they're doing or if they're doing really well.
It's a great last question, by the way.
Well, so I thought that yesterday's fireside chat with Eric Fossum had a good line, and he said, make sure you're doing something compelling. And by that, I mean 10 times better than what exists. And I think that to your point, there's always new developments coming. So if you're going to look at something that's like disrupting or is better than what's before, make sure it is so much better than what's before, because there's going to be a lot of development, from the time you invest to, getting to where you need to go. So we look for something that really significantly moves the needle. And then I would just say the other thing is we look for technology, thought leadership. A lot of companies have really great and dynamic CEOs who can sell and position and see the opportunity, but we also look for that, AI is not for the faint of heart. So we're looking for brainiacs who have true technology, thought leadership, and are deeply immersed in the community and know what's happening from the development perspective too.
I'll answer that in the context of a use case, which would be healthcare AI, which I've been spending a lot of time in, right? So for me, starting to try to read white papers from technologists on their kind of algorithms or what they're doing at the math level, I was never going to get there, right? So then I started focusing on who's it potentially going to disrupt or who are the customers. So if it's a physician, if it's a medical researcher, what's their traditional workflow? What is the gold standard in an offline, non-AI centric point of view? Usually there are 1.0 generation kind of web applications that are out there. So how is an AI powered version going to be superior to it? And you can run testing on that kind of stuff. But ultimately, AI is being applied, at least my perspective, on a use case, on a vertical, on an application, and that new application has to be better than whatever was there before, more performant, more efficient, et cetera. And that can be vetted out, right? And having kind of experts that are end user oriented will give you a sense of it.
Thank you. Nihal, now is a good time for a one-word answer.
Okay.
Wonderful. So with that, thank you guys very much. And I'll go back over to Evan.
All right. Great job.